The most dangerous thing about powerful men isn't their anger. It's the moment they stop caring who's watching them break. The ballroom smelled like white roses and old money. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while a string quartet played something soft enough to make billionaires feel sentimental about themselves. I stood near the champagne tower pretending not to stare at the man everyone else was secretly watching. Luca Moretti looked like the kind of man newspapers warned people about without ever saying his name directly. 34 years old. Tailored black tuxedo. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a face too sharp to belong to someone kind. He stood beneath golden light with one hand in his pocket while Manhattan's elite circled him carefully, laughing too loudly at his jokes, agreeing too quickly with his opinions. Fear always disguised itself as respect in rooms like this. I adjusted the silver tray in my hands and tried to focus on work. One more catering shift. One more night smiling at strangers who never remembered my name. My feet already ached from 10 straight hours in heels, and the tiny band-aid behind my ankle had stopped helping around an hour ago. "Claire, table 12 needs another bottle," my manager whispered as he rushed past me. I nodded automatically, grabbing a fresh bottle of champagne before weaving through politicians, models, hedge fund executives, and women dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than my apartment building. That's when the room changed. You could feel it before you understood it. Conversations slowed. Glasses stopped moving halfway to lips. Even the musicians hesitated. At the center of the ballroom, a blonde woman in a silk white gown stepped backward from Luca Moretti like she was escaping a fire. Vivian Sinclair. His fiancée. America's favorite socialite. The woman currently being photographed for every gossip magazine in New York. Except now her face looked cold. Detached. "I can't do this anymore," she said loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. A few nervous laughs echoed nearby before dying immediately. Luca didn't move. Didn't blink. "Vivian," he said. Quietly. "God." Even his voice sounded controlled. "No," she shook her head hard enough to send diamonds flashing beneath chandelier light. "I'm done pretending this relationship is normal." Every camera in the room suddenly pointed toward them. "You scare people, Luca," she continued. "You buy loyalty. You buy silence. But you can't buy me." Nobody breathed. Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass shattered against marble. Luca's jaw tightened slightly. That was the only visible crack in him. Vivian looked around the ballroom like she wanted witnesses. "I would rather marry a middle-class nobody with a clean soul than spend one more year attached to a man people fear more than they love." The silence afterward felt endless. Brutal. Luca stood completely still while flashes exploded around him like lightning. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody defended him. In rooms full of powerful people, survival always came first. Then something unexpected happened. Luca looked away from Vivian. His eyes moved through the crowd slowly until they landed on me. Directly on me. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly lost grip on the tray. Because unlike everyone else in that ballroom, I hadn't looked away from him. I don't know why. Maybe because for 1 second he didn't look dangerous. He looked humiliated. Human. Broken in a way rich people never allowed themselves to appear in public. His stare held mine across the room while the entire ballroom disappeared around us. Then he started walking toward me. Slow. Controlled. Terrifying. Every guest stepped aside instantly. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears by the time he stopped inches away from me. Up close, Luca Moretti smelled like expensive cologne and rain from the balcony doors behind him. His eyes were darker than I expected. Not cold. Exhausted. He glanced at the name tag pinned against my black uniform. "Claire Bennett," he said softly. The way he said my name made my skin warm with panic. "Yes." I whispered. He stared at me for 3 long seconds while cameras flashed around us like a storm. Then the most feared man in New York asked the question that destroyed both of our lives. Would you marry me tonight? For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. Maybe not joking. Maybe spiraling. The cameras flashing around us made everything feel unreal, like I had accidentally walked into somebody else's nightmare. I tightened my grip on the silver tray so hard my fingers started hurting. What? I whispered. Luca Moretti did not smile. That somehow made it worse. Behind him, people stared openly now. Billionaires. Socialites. Politicians. Men who probably controlled entire industries were suddenly pretending not to eavesdrop while absolutely eavesdropping. Vivian Sinclair still stood near the center of the ballroom, frozen beside her father, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion. Luca never looked back at her. His eyes stayed on mine. You heard me, he said calmly. Marry me tonight. My heartbeat turned uneven. You do not even know me. I know you did not look away. The answer hit harder than it should have. Because he was right. Everyone else in that room had looked at him like he was radioactive the second things became ugly. I had not. Not because I was brave. Mostly because I recognized humiliation when I saw it. Mine had just happened in cheaper places. A hand suddenly grabbed my elbow. Claire, my manager hissed under his breath. Please tell me you did not do something insane. I finally blinked hard enough to reconnect with reality. I need to go, I told Luca quickly. I think you should ask someone else. His gaze did not move. I am asking you. The room somehow became even quieter. I could practically hear phones recording us from every corner. This was not romantic. It was not charming. It was a powerful man standing in the ruins of his pride asking a stranger to step into the fire with him. I should have walked away immediately. Any sane woman would have. But then my phone buzzed inside my apron pocket. One vibration. Then another. Then another. I already knew who it was before checking. St. Catherine Medical Center Billing Department. Again. My chest tightened painfully. Earlier that week, my younger sister Emma had called me crying from a hospital room in Queens because her insurance had stopped covering part of her treatment. I had spent the past 3 months juggling restoration work during the day and catering jobs at night trying to keep her from drowning financially. I barely slept anymore. Every bill felt heavier than the last. I looked back at Luca before I could stop myself. The man standing in front of me probably spent more money on watches than I had made in my entire life. He noticed the shift in my expression instantly. Men like him survived by reading weakness faster than normal people. Walk with me, he said quietly. 5 minutes. Then you can say no. I should have refused. Instead, I followed him toward the balcony doors while whispers exploded behind us like fireworks. Cold November air wrapped around my skin the second we stepped outside. Manhattan glittered beneath us in silver and gold, taxis moving like streams of light 20 stories below. Luca loosened his tie slightly for the first time all night. The movement made him look less untouchable somehow. More tired. This is about revenge, I said carefully. You want to embarrass her back. No, then why me? He rested both hands against the balcony railing without looking at me. Because everybody in that room saw a monster standing there tonight. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it sounded exhausted. Hollow. You were the only person who looked at me like I was still human. I swallowed hard. Dangerous men were not supposed to sound lonely. Mr. Moretti, Luca. Luca, I corrected softly. You do not want a wife tonight. You want anesthesia. Finally, he looked at me again. God. Those eyes were devastating up close. Not cold. Just deeply disappointed in the world. Maybe, he admitted. But I would make sure your sister never worries about another hospital bill again. Every ounce of air disappeared from my lungs. I never told him about Emma. I stepped backward instinctively. How do you know about my sister? I know everything before I make important decisions. The answer should have terrified me. Instead, what scared me most was how badly I wanted to say yes. People think life-changing decisions happen with certainty. They do not. Sometimes they happen because you are exhausted enough to stop fighting fate. I stared at Luca across the balcony while cold wind tangled my hair around my face. Somewhere behind us, music still drifted through the ballroom like the night had not just exploded in front of 400 wealthy witnesses. My chest hurt from how fast my heart was beating. This is insane, I whispered. Luca nodded once like he appreciated honesty. Probably. You investigated me in under 5 minutes. 3. The answer should not have made me want to laugh, but somehow it did. Barely. Nervously. He noticed. His mouth almost moved into a smile before stopping halfway, like his body had forgotten how. Claire, he said quietly, I am not asking for forever. I folded my arms tightly against the cold. That does not make this less terrifying. I know. He sounded sincere. That was the dangerous part. Not his money. Not his reputation. The sincerity. Men like Luca Moretti were supposed to feel untouchable, but standing beside him now felt strangely similar to standing beside someone drowning quietly in deep water. How long? I asked carefully. 1 year. My eyes narrowed immediately. You already thought this through? I think through everything. Of course he did. The city practically ran on rumors about Luca Moretti. Half the stories painted him as some ruthless financial kingmaker who controlled politicians from behind closed doors. The other half sounded too dramatic to be real. Either way, men like him did not improvise major decisions. Which meant this was not emotional chaos anymore. This was negotiation. A 1-year marriage, I repeated slowly. And after that? You walk away with financial security. Your sister receives the best medical care available immediately. The words landed heavily between us. Emma's tired face flashed through my mind again. The dark circles beneath her eyes. The way she tried smiling through pain because she hated making me worry. I hated this. Hated that life could corner people into impossible choices while rich men called it opportunity. And what exactly do you get out of this arrangement? I asked. Luca finally looked away toward the Manhattan skyline. Silence. The answer confused me. What does that mean? Tonight made headlines before the night even ended. His expression hardened slightly. Tomorrow every business rival, every reporter, every politician who hates me will smell weakness. The wind shifted around us. Somewhere far below, sirens echoed through the city. But a marriage changes the narrative, I realized quietly. He looked back at me. Yes. So I become damage control. You become untouchable. His tone sharpened slightly on the last words. Protective. Possessive. I could not tell which one unsettled me more. And if I say no? I asked. Luca stared at me for several seconds before answering. Then I walk back into that ballroom alone and never bother you again. No manipulation. No threats. Somehow that made the choice harder. Because if he had acted cruelly, I could have hated him easily. Instead, he stood there looking tired enough to collapse beneath all that expensive fabric and control. Behind the balcony glass, I noticed people watching us openly now. Phones out. Cameras lifted. Waiting. Judging. I suddenly realized something awful. They already expected me to say yes. To them, women always said yes to powerful men eventually. Luca followed my gaze toward the crowd inside. You do not owe me anything, he said quietly. Remember that before you decide. God. Why did that sentence hurt more than pressure would have? My throat tightened unexpectedly. I looked down at my hands. Paint stains still marked the edges of my fingers from restoration work earlier that morning. Tiny traces of blue and gold trapped beneath my nails. Evidence of a completely ordinary life standing inches away from a man whose world looked built from marble and secrets. 1 year, I repeated softly. Luca nodded once. 1 year. I inhaled slowly, trying to ignore the sound of my pulse roaring in my ears. Then I did the stupidest thing I had ever done in my life. I looked the most powerful man in New York directly in the eyes and said, "Okay." For the first time all night, Luca Moretti looked genuinely shocked. The second I said yes, the entire atmosphere around Luca changed. Not softer. Not warmer. Sharper somehow. Like the world had snapped back into focus for him after spinning out of control all night. He opened the balcony door slowly and the noise of the ballroom crashed into us again. Music. Laughter pretending to sound natural. Hundreds of people trying to process what they had just witnessed. Every head turned toward us immediately. Cameras flashed so aggressively it almost hurt my eyes. I froze beside the doorway for half a second, suddenly aware that my black catering uniform still smelled faintly like champagne and kitchen coffee while the man next to me looked like he belonged on the cover of a financial magazine called Fear Itself. Luca glanced at me once. Stay close to me. The words were calm. Not controlling. Somehow that made me obey faster. We walked back into the ballroom together and conversations dropped instantly around us. I could literally feel judgment pressing against my skin from every direction. Confusion too. Nobody understood why Luca Moretti would walk away from a socialite dynasty engagement and return holding hands with a woman carrying a catering tray 15 minutes later. Honestly, neither did I. My manager looked seconds away from fainting as we passed him. Claire, he mouthed silently, horrified. I gave him a tiny helpless shrug because what exactly was I supposed to explain? Sorry, I accidentally agreed to marry a billionaire mafia king after serving mini crab cakes. Luca stopped near the center of the ballroom beneath the giant crystal chandelier where Vivian still stood surrounded by stunned guests. Her expression changed the second she saw us together. Not heartbreak. Offense. Like she could not believe the replacement standing beside him was me. Luca released my hand carefully before speaking. Thank you all for attending tonight, he said smoothly. Every conversation in the room died instantly. There has been a change of plans. God. My pulse nearly stopped. He turned toward me then, and for one terrifying second all those powerful people looked at me too. Miss Claire Bennett has agreed to become my wife. Audible gasps moved through the crowd. Somebody near the back actually whispered, who, which honestly felt fair. Vivian laughed. Suddenly. Sharp. Disbelieving. You cannot be serious. Luca barely glanced at her. I have never been more serious. Her face lost color immediately. I expected screaming after that. Drama. Public rage. Instead Vivian's eyes moved slowly over me from head to toe before she smiled coldly. She is wearing a catering uniform. The humiliation hit instantly. Hot and familiar. I lowered my eyes automatically toward the black fabric I had spent all evening trying to keep wrinkle-free. Then something unexpected happened. Luca stepped slightly closer beside me. And yet, he said calmly, she still managed to have more dignity tonight than anyone else in this room. Silence. Absolute silence. My throat tightened painfully. Nobody had defended me like that before. Not publicly. Not without wanting something in return. Vivian looked furious now. You are doing this because I embarrassed you. Luca's expression never changed. No, he replied quietly. I am doing this because for the first time tonight, I met someone honest. Every camera flash exploded at once after that. The room became chaos instantly. Reporters rushed forward. People whispered aggressively behind champagne glasses. Somewhere near the orchestra, somebody started clapping nervously before stopping when nobody joined in. I could barely breathe anymore. Luca leaned down slightly toward me without touching me. You look overwhelmed. That is because I am overwhelmed. A faint almost smile touched his mouth again. Tiny. Brief. Human. Fair point. Then an older woman in diamonds stepped directly into our path. Elegant. Terrifying. Silver hair twisted perfectly at the base of her neck. The resemblance told me immediately who she was before she even spoke. Luca's mother. Her eyes landed on me with devastating precision. Luca, she said carefully, a word. Tomorrow. Now. The temperature around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luca stayed calm. Mother. She finally looked directly at me. Every expensive inch of her seemed designed to intimidate weaker women. Miss Bennet, she said coolly. Do you understand what kind of family you are walking into? Before I could answer, Luca spoke first. She does. Not need your permission. The older woman stared at her son for a long moment before saying something that made my stomach turn cold. No, she replied softly. But she will need protection. Rich people know how to smile while threatening you. I realized that the moment Luca's mother took my arm and guided me away from the ballroom like we were simply two elegant women heading for a private conversation instead of strangers standing inside a social disaster. Her grip was gentle. Her diamonds were not. You must forgive the intensity of tonight, she said smoothly as we entered a quieter hallway lined with gold-framed paintings. My son enjoys making dramatic decisions when emotionally cornered. I stayed silent carefully. Something told me every word mattered around women like her. She finally stopped near a tall window overlooking Manhattan and turned toward me fully. Up close, she was beautiful in the intimidating way expensive things often are. Controlled. Precise. How much? She asked calmly. The question caught me off guard. Excuse me. How much money would convince you to disappear before this becomes legally embarrassing? There it was. Not cruelty exactly. Just class warfare wrapped in perfect manners. I folded my arms tightly against myself. I did not ask your son to propose to me. No, she agreed softly. But you accepted. The city lights reflected against the glass behind her while somewhere down the hallway reporters still shouted Luca's name. My pulse had not slowed once all night. Mrs. Moretti, Viviana. Viviana, I corrected carefully. I know how this looks. Her perfectly shaped eyebrow lifted slightly. Do you? The words landed harder than shouting would have. Women have been attaching themselves to powerful men for centuries, Claire. Usually with very specific intentions. Heat crawled slowly into my face. You think I am after money? I think desperate people make dangerous choices. I should have felt angry. Instead, exhaustion settled into my chest like wet concrete because part of me understood exactly why she thought that. From the outside, this probably looked ridiculous. A struggling restoration artist agreeing to marry a billionaire hours after meeting him. The kind of story tabloids loved. The kind intelligent women warned their daughters about. My sister is sick, I said quietly before I could stop myself. Viviana's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Luca told me he could help her. Ah. Understanding flickered across her face immediately. There it is. Shame burned hotter than anger ever could. You think that makes me manipulative? No, her voice softened slightly for the first time. I think it makes you vulnerable. The hallway fell quiet around us. I looked down at the marble floor because suddenly I felt 27 years old in the worst possible way. Tired. Small. Out of place inside a world built for people who never checked their bank account before grocery shopping. You should know something about my son, Viviana said carefully. Luca does not survive betrayal well. The sentence felt heavier than it sounded. Before I could answer, footsteps approached behind us. Luca. Of course. His tuxedo jacket was gone now, sleeves rolled slightly at the forearms like the night itself had worn him down. Mother, he said evenly. You are interrogating my fiancé. I am assessing risk. Claire is not a risk. The certainty in his voice startled me more than anything else tonight. Viviana studied him quietly for several seconds. That confidence worries me. Luca stepped closer beside me. Not touching. Just there. Solid. Protective in a way that made my heartbeat turn uneven again. The marriage license is being prepared, he said calmly. I blinked hard. Tonight? He looked at me carefully then, almost like he had forgotten normal people needed time to process insanity. You can still change your mind. God. Why did he keep making it harder to hate him? Before I could answer, a younger man in a charcoal suit hurried down the hallway toward us. He stopped beside Luca immediately. Sir, he said quietly. The press already leaked her identity. My stomach dropped. Luca's expression darkened instantly. How bad? The man hesitated. They found her apartment address. Every ounce of air disappeared from my lungs. Luca turned toward me so fast it almost startled me. Claire. His voice changed completely then. Colder. Sharper. Protective in a way that suddenly felt very real. You are not going home tonight. Nothing exposes how fragile your normal life is faster than seeing strangers discuss your address like it already belongs to the public. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might actually be sick right there in the hallway. What do you mean they found my address? I asked quietly. The man beside Luca shifted uncomfortably. Someone leaked your driver's license information to the press. My skin went cold instantly. I pictured my apartment building in Queens. The narrow hallway that always smelled faintly like old laundry and takeout containers. Mrs. Delgado watering plants outside her door every morning at 7. Emma sleeping on my couch after treatments because stairs exhausted her lately. It suddenly felt exposed. Unsafe in a way it never had before. Luca's expression hardened into something almost frighteningly calm. Get a security team to the building immediately, he told the man. No reporters near her sister. Already handled. Luca nodded once before looking back at me. Claire. His voice softened slightly. Listen to me carefully. I hated how shaky my breathing sounded. Okay. Tonight changed things very quickly. The media will not leave you alone now. Because you proposed to me in front of half of Manhattan. A tiny flicker of guilt crossed his face. Barely visible. Gone instantly. Yes. I pressed my fingertips against my forehead. Everything felt too loud. Too fast. 1 hour ago I had been carrying champagne trays trying not to get fired. Now strangers were leaking my address online because a billionaire with heartbreak in his eyes asked me to marry him under a chandelier. I need to call Emma, I whispered. Of course. Luca pulled a phone from his pocket immediately and handed it to me without hesitation. Expensive. Sleek. Probably worth more than my monthly rent. I stared at it for a second before taking it carefully. You do not trust me with your number? I asked weakly, trying to breathe through panic. To my surprise, Luca actually looked amused. Claire, he said quietly, there are very few things in this world I do not trust myself to control. The answer should not have made my pulse jump. I stepped away slightly and called Emma with trembling fingers. She answered on the second ring, sounding half asleep. Claire. Relief almost knocked the air out of me. Hey. Are you okay? Yeah, she mumbled softly. Why do you sound weird? I looked over at Luca instinctively. He stood several feet away now, giving me privacy without being asked. Somehow that tiny act of consideration affected me more than it should have. Do not look online tonight, I said carefully. Emma immediately became suspicious. Claire. Promise me. Silence. Then, what happened? I closed my eyes briefly. I accidentally got engaged. Dead silence. Somewhere behind me, I heard one of Luca's security men cough violently, trying not to laugh. You what? Emma finally whispered. It is complicated. You disappear for one catering shift and return as somebody's fiancé. Even exhausted and medicated, my sister still sounded judgmental. Honestly, fair. I will explain later, I promised softly. But you are safe, okay? Nobody can come near the apartment tonight. Her voice grew quieter immediately. Claire, what kind of man is this? The question settled heavily in my chest because I honestly did not know yet. I looked toward Luca again. He was speaking calmly with his security team now, one hand loosened at his tie, exhaustion visible around his eyes for the first time all night. Powerful. Controlled. Dangerous maybe. But also strangely gentle with me in ways I did not understand. I do not know, I admitted honestly. But I think he is lonely. The silence on Emma's end lasted several seconds. Those are usually the dangerous ones, she whispered softly. After the call ended, I handed the phone back to Luca carefully. Our fingers brushed for less than a second. Warm. Steady. Human. His eyes searched my face immediately. Your sister. Safe. Relief visibly loosened something in his shoulders. Good. I stared at him carefully then because suddenly a strange realization hit me all at once. Luca Moretti had spent the entire night protecting everyone except himself. What happens now? I asked quietly. He held my gaze for a long moment before answering. Now, he said softly, you come home with me. The car waiting outside the hotel looked less like transportation and more like something presidents used during emergencies. Black SUV. Tinted windows. 2 additional vehicles idling behind it like silent shadows. Rain had started falling over Manhattan by the time Luca guided me through the private exit away from reporters. The cold air smelled like wet pavement and expensive perfume lingering from the gala upstairs. Cameras still flashed from across the street the second we appeared. My stomach tightened immediately. Luca's hand moved lightly against the small of my back, steering me toward the SUV without pressure but with unmistakable awareness. Protective again. Keep your head down, he said quietly. I hated how naturally I listened to him now. The moment the door closed behind us, silence wrapped around the interior like another world entirely. Soft leather seats. Dim lighting. The faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne. Outside, New York blurred into streaks of gold and rain across the dark windows as the convoy pulled into traffic. I sat stiffly beside Luca trying to process the fact that I was apparently going home with a man the entire city feared. My life officially no longer made sense. Luca loosened the top button of his dress shirt with visible exhaustion before glancing toward me. You are very quiet. I let out one disbelieving laugh. I think I passed overwhelmed around 30 minutes ago. To my surprise, he nodded like he understood completely. Fair. The SUV turned smoothly through Midtown while silence settled again. Not awkward exactly. Just heavy with too many unanswered questions. Finally, I looked at him directly. Can I ask you something honestly? Always. Why me? Luca stared out the rain-covered window for several seconds before answering. You were kind to me when you had no reason to be. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. I barely spoke to you. Exactly. He looked back at me then, dark eyes steady beneath the low lights inside the SUV. You did not perform. I frowned slightly. Perform? Most people do around power. His voice stayed calm. Controlled. Fear. Flattery. Manipulation. Everyone wants something. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Tiny traces of gold paint still clung beneath my nails from restoring antique frames earlier that week. I want something, I admitted quietly. Your help for Emma. That is different. Why? His gaze softened almost invisibly. Because you wanted to save someone else before yourself. God. Dangerous men should not know how to say things like that. The city lights flickered across his face while rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time all night, he looked less like a myth and more like a tired man carrying too much alone. Does this kind of attention happen often? I asked carefully, glancing toward the security vehicles behind us. The press? The threats? People leaking addresses? Luca's jaw tightened slightly. Usually they target me. Something about the way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly. Like he genuinely hated that I had been dragged into this world tonight. You could still walk away, he said quietly after a moment. I blinked at him. After all this? Yes. Would you let me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Luca held my gaze for several long seconds. Honest seconds. Not rehearsed ones. I would, he said softly. But I would not want to. My heartbeat stumbled painfully against my ribs. Before I could answer, the SUV slowed suddenly beneath towering black iron gates that opened automatically as we approached. I looked through the rain-streaked window and forgot how to breathe for a second. The Moretti estate looked less like a home and more like something built for royalty hiding from the world. Massive stone walls. Warm lights glowing behind enormous windows. Elegant fountains illuminated beneath the rain. It was beautiful in the intimidating way museums were beautiful. Untouchable. The SUV rolled slowly up the circular driveway while staff members appeared beneath the front entrance carrying umbrellas. Luca watched my reaction carefully. You hate it, he observed. I do not hate it. I stared at the enormous mansion again. I just think one family should not legally be allowed to own this many windows. For one stunned second, Luca Moretti actually laughed. Not the polite social version. A real laugh. Low. Brief. Human. And somehow that sound frightened me more than anything else tonight because it felt like the first crack in something dangerous. The inside of the Moretti estate was quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Controlled. Like the entire house had been trained not to breathe too loudly around powerful people. The massive front doors opened before we even reached them and 3 staff members immediately stepped forward beneath the warm glow of crystal sconces. Nobody looked surprised to see me. That somehow unsettled me more than chaos would have. Good evening, Mr. Moretti, an older man said calmly while taking Luca's coat. His eyes shifted politely toward me without curiosity. Miss Bennett. I blinked. How do you already know my name? Luca handed me my umbrella before answering. Because nothing remains private for long in this house. The marble floors inside reflected golden light like water. Everything smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive candles. Art lined the walls everywhere I looked. Real art too. Oil paintings in antique frames. Sculptures that belonged in museums instead of hallways. My entire apartment could probably fit inside the entrance alone. I suddenly became painfully aware of my black catering uniform again. Luca noticed immediately. You are thinking about leaving. I am thinking about how I accidentally walked into a castle. One corner of his mouth lifted faintly. That too. A woman in a navy dress approached quietly carrying folded clothing in her arms. Miss Bennet's room has been prepared, she said softly. Room. Not rooms. Singular. My pulse immediately misbehaved again. Luca must have noticed because his expression shifted instantly. Separate rooms, he clarified calmly before I could panic myself into unconsciousness. You will have your own wing. I stared at him suspiciously. Your own wing is a sentence nobody normal says out loud. Another flicker of amusement crossed his face before disappearing again. God. Every time he looked human, it became harder to remember I should probably be terrified of him. The woman handed me the folded clothes carefully. Soft gray cashmere pants. A cream sweater. Nothing flashy. Just comfortable. Thank you, I said automatically. She smiled gently. Welcome home, Miss Bennet. Home. The word hit strangely hard. Before I could process that, another voice interrupted from the staircase above us. So the rumors are true. I looked up immediately. A younger man leaned casually against the railing on the second floor wearing dark jeans and a black sweater. Mid-20s maybe. Same sharp features as Luca. Same dark hair. But where Luca carried silence like armor, this man carried mischief like a weapon. His eyes moved directly to me with open curiosity. You married a caterer, he told Luca. Mother is threatening to relocate to Switzerland. Luca looked exhausted already. Damien. The younger man walked downstairs slowly, hands in his pockets. Relax. I like her more than the blonde already. I nearly choked on air. Luca closed his eyes briefly like this conversation physically pained him. Claire, he said calmly, this is my brother Damien. Damien extended his hand immediately. Nice to meet the woman currently destroying Manhattan society. I shook his hand carefully despite myself. Nice to meet the man enjoying it too much. His grin widened instantly. Oh, she is definitely staying. Luca muttered something in Italian under his breath that sounded deeply unenthusiastic. For the first time all night, I almost smiled fully. Almost. Then movement caught my attention near the far hallway entrance. A little boy stood partially hidden behind the doorway staring at us silently. Maybe 8 years old. Dark curls. Pale skin. Huge green eyes watching everything carefully. My smile faded immediately. The child looked nervous. Not frightened exactly. Just, withdrawn. Luca noticed him instantly. Something subtle changed in his face then. Softer around the edges somehow. Matteo, he said gently. The little boy did not answer. He only stared at me quietly before looking back at Luca. Is this the new wife? He asked softly. The entire entrance hall went completely silent. Luca glanced at me once before answering carefully. Yes. Matteo studied me for another long second before saying something that made every adult in the room freeze. She looks sad too. Children always notice the truths adults spend years hiding. Matteo's words settled over the entire entrance hall so quietly it almost hurt. She looks sad too. Nobody moved for a second. Not Luca. Not Damien. Not even the staff pretending not to listen nearby. The little boy remained half hidden behind the doorway clutching the sleeve of his oversized sweater while his green eyes stayed fixed on me with unsettling calm. He could not have been older than 8, but there was something deeply observant about him. Like he had learned to study people carefully before deciding whether they were safe. I swallowed hard before crouching slightly to meet his eye level. You are very honest, I said softly. Matteo considered that seriously. Most people lie in this house. Somewhere behind me, Damien let out a quiet sound that suspiciously resembled a laugh disguised as coughing. Luca did not react at all. Somehow his silence felt heavier. Matteo finally stepped farther into the light and I noticed dark circles beneath his eyes immediately. Tired eyes. Lonely eyes. The kind children should never have. You should be asleep, Luca said gently. The softness in his voice startled me again. Matteo shrugged one shoulder. I heard yelling downstairs. Right. The entire city had probably heard yelling downstairs tonight. The little boy looked back at me carefully. Are you really staying here? I hesitated. Honestly, I still did not know. Nothing about tonight felt permanent yet. Real maybe. But not permanent. Before I could answer, Luca spoke quietly beside me. If she wants to. Matteo absorbed that answer seriously before nodding once like he respected it. Then his gaze dropped toward my hands. Why do your fingers have paint on them? I blinked in surprise. Most people never notice details that small. I restore paintings, I explained softly. Old ones. Matteo stepped a little closer finally. Like fixing broken things. The question hit harder than it should have. Sometimes, I admitted quietly. His expression turned thoughtful after that. Children processed sadness differently than adults. Less complicated. More honest. My mom used to paint, he whispered suddenly. The air changed instantly around Luca. Tiny shift. Tiny silence. But I felt it. Matteo looked down immediately afterward like he regretted speaking. Luca's jaw tightened slightly before he crouched beside the boy calmly. Matteo. The child nodded without looking up. I know. Luca rested one hand gently against the back of his neck. Careful. Protective. Not performative. Real affection always looked quieter than movies promised. It is late, Luca said softly. Will you try sleeping again for me? Matteo finally nodded. Before leaving, though, he looked back toward me one last time. The east hallway is quieter at night, he told me seriously. The walls make noises on the north side when it rains. My heart almost cracked a little at that. Thank you for the warning. He accepted my answer with complete seriousness before disappearing upstairs again without another word. Silence settled over the entrance hall after he left. Damien shoved his hands deeper into his pockets before glancing between me and Luca knowingly. Well, he said carefully, that went significantly better than expected. Luca stood slowly beside me again. Go to bed, Damien. His brother smirked immediately. Good night, sister-in-law. Absolutely not, Luca muttered instantly while Damien walked away laughing softly to himself. I watched the staircase for another second before looking back at Luca. He is your son. Luca nodded once. Adopted. Something in his voice told me not to ask more tonight. The older housekeeper stepped forward gently then. Miss Bennet, I can show you to your room. Room. Right. I suddenly felt the exhaustion of the entire night hit my body all at once. My feet hurt. My head hurt. My entire life had apparently collapsed and rebuilt itself in under 4 hours. I looked toward Luca one last time before following the housekeeper upstairs. Claire. I turned back immediately. Luca stood beneath the warm chandelier light watching me carefully. Tired eyes. Controlled. Expression. Entire worlds hidden behind silence. You do not look sad, he said quietly. I frowned slightly. What do I look like? For the first time since I met him, Luca Moretti answered without hesitation. Like someone trying very hard not to run.